you have been told a very comfortable, very naive lie about your own mind. You have been taught that when your heart stops beating and the oxygen stops flowing, the lights simply go out. The standard scientific consensus wants you to believe that consciousness is nothing more than a complex computer program running on the wet meat of your brain, and that when the biological hardware fails, the software is deleted forever. I have spent my life looking at the deepest mathematical structures of reality, and I am here to tell you that this view is fundamentally flawed. The universe does not work like a conventional computer, and neither do you. Think carefully about this. If your consciousness is just the firing of neurons, then a sufficiently powerful machine could eventually replicate your exact awareness. But I realized decades ago that human understanding and conscious experience cannot be replicated by any algorithm. There is something strictly non-computable happening inside our heads. Your awareness is not a biological accident. It is a fundamental feature of the cosmos, rooted in the very fabric of space and time, operating at a scale so incredibly small that the standard laws of physics completely break down. This leads us to a staggering paradox. If your mind is tied to the quantum geometry of the universe itself, what actually happens when your physical body perishes? The basic laws of quantum mechanics dictate that quantum information cannot simply be destroyed. It must go somewhere. It must do something. We are about to step into the exact space where quantum mechanics meets human mortality. If you are looking for the uncomfortable truth of the universe and not the easy, oversimplified explanations they hand out in textbooks, subscribe to Infinity Engine. Today I'm going to show you exactly why death is not a final curtain, but a quantum transition. And to understand it, we must first look at the tiny, ignored structures hidden deep inside your own brain. Let us look at the human brain exactly as modern neuroscience presents it. They tell you it is a network of 86 billion neurons connected by trillions of microscopic gaps called synapses. The prevailing scientific dogma states that these neurons act precisely like biological transistors. They fire or they do not fire, a 1 or a 0, according to this view. Your joy, your deep understanding of a beautiful piece of music, your very sense of self, is just a massive wave of ones and zeros echoing through a biological machine. It sounds completely logical, does it not? It is neat, it is measurable, but it is entirely wrong. I saw through this trap a long time ago. A standard computer can calculate at billions of operations per second, but it understands absolutely nothing. It does not feel the answer. It just blindly follows the strict mathematical algorithm it was programmed with. Human consciousness possesses a unique quality of pure understanding that cannot be reduced to a mechanical algorithm. We can grasp logical truths that are mathematically proven to be beyond the reach of any traditional computer. And therefore, whatever the brain is doing to generate consciousness, it cannot be a standard computational process. It has to be something else entirely. So if the brain is not a standard digital computer, what is it? And to find the true answer, we have to look smaller, much smaller. Neuroscientists look at the neuron and they stop there. They treat the cell as the absolute fundamental unit of the mind that is like looking at a massive city from orbit and assuming the streetlights are the smallest moving parts. We must go deep inside the neuron itself. When you look inside a living cell, you do not just find a random bag of fluid. You find an incredibly complex, highly organized scaffolding, a cellular skeleton. And the primary support structures of this skeleton are microscopic tubes called microtubules. Microtubules are tiny cylindrical structures made of a specific protein. And for a long time, biologists foolishly thought they were just there for structural support, exactly like the steel beams holding up a skyscraper. What a colossal failure of scientific imagination. I eventually connected with a medical professional, an anesthesiologist, who brought these specific structures to my attention. He realized something that the rest of the scientific world had completely ignored. When a patient is put under general anesthesia, their consciousness is entirely turned off, but their brain continues to function to keep the body alive. The anesthetic gas does not shut down the whole brain. It specifically targets and binds to these microscopic microtubules. This was the absolute key to the puzzle. These microtubules are so incredibly small that they sit exactly on the boundary line between our normal, everyday physical world and the bizarre, counterintuitive realm of quantum mechanics. In our everyday world, an object is in one specific place at one specific time. A light switch is either on or it is off. But down at the quantum level, the rules of reality completely change. A particle can exist in a state known as superposition. This means it can exist in multiple possible states or multiple possible locations at the exact same time. It sounds impossible to the human mind, but it is a proven fundamental fact of physics. Our most advanced modern technology relies entirely on this fact. For decades, biologists insisted that the warm, wet, and chaotic environment of the living brain would make quantum effects absolutely impossible. They assumed any quantum superposition would instantly collapse. But biology is infinitely more clever than we give it credit for. And inside the hollow, isolated core of these microscopic tubes, conditions are strictly regulated. The proteins can hold a state of quantum superposition. Your neurons are not just firing simple electrical impulses. Down at the deepest subcellular level, they are orchestrating billions of precise quantum events. Your mind is not a digital computer. You are a localized gathering of quantum information, processing reality at a level that standard science is only just beginning to comprehend. So, we have established that the foundation of your mind lies within the quantum superpositions happening inside the microtubules of your brain. You are not a simple machine. You are a biological quantum processor. But a superposition is an incredibly fragile thing. It is a state of hovering between multiple potential realities at the exact same time. By the very laws of physics, this state cannot last forever. It must eventually choose a single state. It must collapse into the reality we actually experience. This brings us to the greatest embarrassment of modern quantum physics, something called the measurement problem. If you ask a standard physicist how a quantum superposition collapses into a single reality, they will likely tell you that it happens when the system is observed or measured. They claim that the mere act of a conscious being looking at a particle forces it to pick a definite state. I have always found this idea philosophically bankrupt and entirely scientifically lazy. Are we truly supposed to believe that the entire universe was just sitting in a blurry haze of probability for billions of years, waiting for a conscious observer to finally evolve and look at it? That is absolute nonsense. The universe does not care if we are looking at it. The collapse of the quantum state must be a real physical event, independent of any observer. To find the real trigger for this collapse, I realized we had to look at the greatest force in the cosmos, the very fabric of space-time itself. According to the laws of general relativity, any mass, no matter how tiny, curves the geometry of space and time around it. Therefore, if a particle is in a quantum superposition, existing in two locations simultaneously, it is literally creating two conflicting, overlapping curvatures in the fabric of the universe. Think of it as a microscopic blister forming in reality. The universe cannot sustain this contradiction indefinitely. The spatial separation between these two possible realities creates an unbearable tension. Eventually, that geometric tension reaches a critical threshold, and the universe forces the system to violently snap into one single reality. This collapse is not random. It is an objective mathematical event driven by the fundamental geometry of space-time, and I named this process objective reduction. Now, bring this mechanism back into your own head. Inside your isolated microtubules, millions of these quantum superpositions are building up and stretching the very fabric of space-time, and then snapping back into a single reality over and over again in a highly orchestrated biological rhythm. Each time this geometric collapse occurs, it produces a fundamental, indivisible moment of conscious awareness. It is like a single frame of a film, and string billions of these quantum space-time collapses together, and you get the continuous flowing experience of your life. This means your consciousness is not an illusion generated by biology. It is directly tied to the fundamental geometry of the cosmos. You are physically connected to the deep structure of the universe. If this level of truth resonates with you, if you want to strip away the illusions of standard science and understand the actual mechanics of existence, you must subscribe to Infinity Engine. We do not deal in comforting fairy tales here. We deal in the undeniable architecture of reality. If your mind is truly an ongoing sequence of these quantum gravitational collapses, then we arrive at a terrifying and magnificent question: what actually happens when the biological machine that orchestrates these collapses finally breaks down? Imagine a moment of clinical death. Your physical heart stops beating, and the oxygen stops flowing to your brain, and the microscopic microtubules lose their energy and begin to degrade. The medical monitor flatlines, and the doctors declare that you are gone. But what happens to the quantum information that made up your consciousness? And what happens to that fundamental connection between your mind and the fabric of space-time? The biologists will tell you that the information simply disappears, like a candle being blown out. That they're ignoring the most absolute, unbreakable law of quantum mechanics. Quantum information cannot ever be destroyed. It is physically impossible. So if your conscious information cannot be deleted, and your brain is no longer capable of holding it, where exactly does it go? Let us confront the exact moment of physical death. The clinical reality is undeniable. Your heart ceases to pump blood. The oxygen supply to your brain is completely cut off. Within minutes, the fragile biological machinery begins to break down. The microscopic microtubules inside your neurons, those perfectly isolated chambers where the quantum states of your consciousness were meticulously maintained, lose their structural integrity, they crack, they degrade. The biological isolation fails. Standard medical science looks at this physical ruin and reaches a very simplistic, very primitive conclusion. They say the engine has stopped, so the mind has vanished. But they are completely ignoring the most rigorous, undisputed law in all of physics. I'm talking about the conservation of quantum information. In the quantum realm, information is a physical reality. It is woven into the very mathematical fabric of the universe. You can burn a book, but the exact quantum state of the atoms that made up that book is not actually deleted from the universe. It is transformed. It is scattered. But it is never, ever destroyed. This creates a profound, unavoidable paradox. We have mathematically established that your conscious mind is fundamentally composed of quantum information, structured by the geometry of space and time. So we know as an absolute fact of physics that this information cannot be erased. Yet the physical brain that housed this information is rapidly shutting down and rotting away. So how can your mind continue to exist when its biological container is completely destroyed? How do we resolve this without resorting to mysticism or religious fantasy? The answer requires us to completely abandon how we think about location and physical space. You are trapped in the everyday illusion that your mind is a physical object locked inside the bone of your skull. But quantum mechanics does not obey the primitive rules of a physical container. I want you to consider the phenomenon of quantum entanglement. So when quantum particles interact, they become inextricably linked, and what happens to one instantly affects the other. Even if they're separated by billions of light years, they cease to be individual particles and become a single unified quantum system. While you are alive, your brain expends massive amounts of biological energy to keep your quantum information entangled, largely with itself, isolated from the chaotic outside environment. Your brain maintains a highly regulated state of coherence. But at the moment of death, that biological shield completely collapses. What happens next is a fundamental physical process called quantum decoherence. But you must not let that scientific term fool you into thinking the information is lost. Decoherence does not mean destruction. It means dissipation. The quantum information that makes up your entire conscious experience, your memories, your specific identity, does not evaporate into nothingness. Instead, it begins to leak out of the degrading microtubules, and it entangles with the environment around you. It spreads into the surrounding matter, and ultimately into the fundamental geometry of space and time itself. Think of a perfectly tuned television receiver picking up a highly complex signal and displaying a brilliant moving picture on a screen. And if you take a heavy hammer and smash the television to pieces, the picture on the screen instantly vanishes. The biological machine is broken, but the television signal, the actual information that created the picture, is still moving through the room. It is still passing through the walls. And the destruction of the physical receiver did absolutely nothing to destroy the underlying information. At the point of physical death, your quantum information simply stops being localized inside a wet, fragile biological computer. It transitions. Your consciousness ceases to be an isolated individual point in space and becomes directly entangled with the larger universe. You do not cease to exist in the way standard biology claims. You simply disperse into the greater cosmos. So your quantum information dissipates into the universe. And you might be picturing this process like a single drop of ink falling into a vast ocean, slowly diluting until it is stretched so thin that it practically becomes nothing at all. You assume that because the information is no longer heavily concentrated inside the bone of your skull, it is effectively dead. That is a massive failure of human intuition. You are dragging your primitive biological biases into a realm where they absolutely do not belong. To understand what actually happens to your awareness when it merges with the fabric of the cosmos, I need you to abandon the most deeply ingrained illusion you possess. I need you to abandon your concept of time. You believe time flows in a straight line, pushing you forward from the past through the present and into the future. You believe this because your biological brain physically forces you to perceive it this way. Your heartbeat, your cellular metabolism, and the rhythmic snapping of those quantum superpositions inside your living microtubules all act together as a relentless biological metronome. They slice a static reality into a moving sequence of present moments. Your brain creates the illusion of flowing time to help your physical body survive in a physical environment. But I can assure you with absolute mathematical certainty that time does not actually flow. According to the laws of relativity, which have been proven in every single rigorous physical test we have ever thrown at them, the past, the present, and the future all exist simultaneously. Physicists call this reality the block universe. Every moment that has ever happened, and every moment that will ever happen, is permanently embedded in the immutable, unchanging geometry of space and time. It is a solid four-dimensional structure. Now, apply this absolute fact of physics to your dispersed quantum consciousness. At the exact moment of clinical death, when your biological metronome shatters, you are suddenly severed from the forced marching pace of linear time. The physical clock stops. But your quantum information, the exact structural pattern of your awareness, is now entangled directly with a timeless space-time block itself. This is where your everyday logic breaks. Without the biological brain artificially filtering reality into a sequence of seconds, minutes, and hours, your unanchored quantum information is no longer confined to a single moving point in time. From the perspective of that dispersed quantum state, the concept of waiting ceases to exist. 1 billion years in a single millisecond are functionally identical, and you transition from experiencing a narrow sliver of time to existing entirely outside of its flow. This is a profoundly difficult concept for a biological creature to grasp. It goes against every survival instinct you have ever evolved. But the universe is not obligated to make sense to a primate living on a rock. If you are willing to shatter your comforting everyday illusions, if you are brave enough to confront the relentless, timeless architecture of actual reality, you must subscribe to Infinity Engine. We will push your intellect to the breaking point because that is the exact boundary where true physics begins. Think about what a timeless existence actually means for your fundamental identity. And if your quantum pattern is entangled with a universe where the past and future already exist, then the information that makes up your life is permanently etched into the cosmic structure. You are not a fleeting biological spark that flashes and vanishes into the dark. You are a permanent mathematical pattern, permanently woven into the geometry of the cosmos. But do not let this sound too comforting. Do not confuse this rigorous physical process with a primitive religious heaven or some simplistic afterlife where you simply wake up in a new body with your personality perfectly intact. The truth is much colder, much more alien, and infinitely more complex than a fairy tale. We have established that the fundamental quantum information of your mind survives the death of the body. But we must now face the deeply uncomfortable truth of what actually happens to your specific individual ego when it merges with the infinite. I told you that your quantum information is permanently woven into the timeless geometry of the cosmos. Human beings hear this and instantly make a fatal, comforting mistake. You imagine that this means your personality, your memories, your name, and your specific sense of self will simply wake up, floating in the void, fully intact, looking around at the universe. You are clinging to the illusion of the ego. Let me be brutally clear, the ego is a biological survival mechanism. It is a highly compressed, rigidly organized, temporary structure. It is designed to keep a primate body alive long enough to reproduce on a dangerous planet. That is all it is. To understand what actually happens to our identity, we must look at the undeniable reality of thermodynamics and quantum entanglement. Think of a magnificent, highly detailed sculpture carved entirely out of ice. Let us say it is a perfect, flawless replica of your own face. That ice sculpture represents your ego. It is your specific, localized consciousness maintained by the perfectly orchestrated quantum superpositions inside your living brain. Now, take that ice sculpture and throw it into a massive, turbulent ocean. What happens? The physical laws of the universe dictate that not a single molecule of water is destroyed in this process. Every single atom of hydrogen and oxygen that made up the face of that sculpture is perfectly conserved. The raw information still exists within the ocean, but the structure the specific geometry that made it a recognizable face is entirely obliterated. It is scattered across millions of gallons of chaotic water. You can never, ever get the sculpture back. And this is the exact process of quantum decoherence playing out. And while you are alive, your brain acts as a meticulously controlled isolation chamber. It burns massive amounts of biological energy, utilizing calories and oxygen to fight back against the natural entropy of the universe. It forces your quantum information to remain deeply entangled only with itself, maintaining the highly specific, rigid shape of your individual personality when you undergo physical death. That biological isolation chamber loses power, the containment field collapses, your specific quantum pattern instantly begins to entangle with the surrounding environment. It entangles with the hospital bed, the air molecules in the room, the electromagnetic fields of the Earth, and ultimately the deep mathematical structure of the cosmos. Your fundamental information is absolutely conserved, but your coherence is completely shattered. The narrative of your daily life, the specific memories of your childhood, your daily anxieties, your desires, they're all stretched out and scramble into the background radiation of reality. The isolated entity that you currently think of as you, the inner voice processing these exact words right now, ceases to function as an independent system. Standard materialist science uses this messy biological breakdown to argue that you simply become absolutely nothing. But that is mathematically illiterate. The information does not vanish. You do not become nothing. You become entangled with everything else. This is the hard truth that human beings are generally too terrified to face. You are terrified of death because you falsely identify your entire existence with the temporary, fragile shape of the ice sculpture rather than the eternal, indestructible water it is made from. The universe does not care about your ego. It operates on the raw, fundamental geometry of information. When that highly localized, tightly bound knot of quantum data unravels, the perspective of the isolated primate dies, but the fundamental capacity for awareness, the pure, raw quantum mechanics of experience that was briefly trapped inside, your biological brain is released back into the cosmic environment. This forces us to look at the universe itself in a completely radical way. And if the fundamental components of your consciousness disperse into the geometry of space-time, and if space and time are already saturated with the quantum remnants of every conscious event that has ever occurred, then what exactly is the universe? We are backed into a corner and forced to ask a massive question. Are we just biological accidents walking around in a dead, empty void? Or is the fabric of reality itself fundamentally structured by the mathematics of awareness? I asked you a terrifying question. If your ego shatters and the pure quantum information of your awareness disperses into the background of space and time, is the universe itself essentially structured by consciousness? To find the absolute answer to this, we must zoom out from your dying biological brain and look at the ultimate, mathematically proven fate of the entire cosmos. Standard cosmologists will confidently tell you that our universe is expanding and that one day it will simply die. They call it the heat death. They claim that trillions of years from now, all the stars will burn out, all the galaxies will drift apart. Even the supermassive black holes will eventually evaporate into cold radiation. They picture a final, eternal void of absolute nothingness. But once again, their view is incredibly narrow. They are failing to see the ultimate mathematical trick hidden in the geometry of space-time. Let us look closely at what actually happens in that unimaginably distant, freezing future. Eventually, all matter, every single proton and neutron, will completely decay. The only thing left in the entire cosmos will be pure radiation photons of light traveling through an infinite empty void. But here is the physical fact that changes absolutely everything. A photon has no mass. And according to the absolute laws of relativity, if you have no mass, you do not experience time. To a photon of light, a journey across the entire width of the universe takes exactly 0 seconds. Furthermore, without mass, there is no physical way to measure distance, and scale completely loses its meaning. Think about this logically. If the universe contains nothing but massless photons, it entirely forgets how big it is, and it completely forgets how much time has passed. I realized years ago that the mathematics of an infinitely large, empty, cold universe are geometrically identical to the mathematics of an infinitely small, infinitely dense, incredibly hot singularity. The end state of our dying universe is the exact mathematical equivalent of the starting point of a brand new universe. The heat death is not an ending, it is a phase transition. The infinite empty void completely forgets its own scale, and in that mathematically forced amnesia, it triggers the next Big Bang. I call this exact process conformal cyclic cosmology. The universe did not begin with our Big Bang, and it will not end with our heat death. It is an endless, repeating chain of cosmic eons. If your mind is sharp enough to grasp this relentless, cyclical nature of reality, and if you are completely exhausted by the simplistic fairy tales peddled by mainstream science, you must subscribe to Infinity Engine. We do not stop our calculations at the edge of the known universe. We push the logic right through to the other side. Now, bring the scattered, decohered quantum information of your conscious mind back into this massive equation. At the moment of your death, your fundamental awareness entangled with the geometry of the universe, and as the universe marches toward its final massless state, space and time become completely saturated with the quantum remnants of every single conscious event that has ever occurred. Every thought, every collapse of every microtubule is permanently baked into the geometrical structure of the void. When the universe forgets its scale, when the massive dead void crosses the mathematical boundary and aggressively snaps into the singularity of the next Big Bang, that quantum information is not left behind. It cannot be left behind. It is carried over. The fundamental mathematical shape of the next universe is directly influenced by the accumulated quantum geometry of the previous one, and that geometry includes the dispersed data of your conscious mind. Your awareness is not a pointless biological accident that flickers out in the dark. It is a highly localized, deeply concentrated processing node for the universe itself. You are the cosmos attempting to resolve its own quantum states, and when your physical body dies, you do not vanish. You simply return your processed quantum data back to the foundational architecture of reality, preparing the physical geometry required to birth the next iteration of time and space. Death is not the opposite of life. Death is the exact physical mechanism that allows the universe to remember itself. We have traveled from the microscopic, isolated protein chambers of your neurons to the infinite, dying cosmic void, and back again to the fiery mathematical birth of a new reality. I have laid out the absolute, undeniable mechanics of your existence. So when you look in the mirror, you are not looking at a temporary biological machine. You are looking at a localized region of the universe that has temporarily organized itself to experience the illusion of flowing time, and you're the cosmos looking back at itself, collapsing infinite quantum possibilities into a singular, concrete reality. The mainstream scientific consensus wants you to feel small. They want you to believe that you are an insignificant speck of dust drifting through a cold, dead, and meaningless void. They tell you that your mind is a fleeting glitch of chemistry, a biological accident doomed to total erasure the exact moment your physical heart stops beating. I am telling you that the strict laws of physics and mathematics dictate otherwise. Your individual ego, the temporary psychological mask you wear to survive on this specific planet, will absolutely shatter. It will dissolve into the chaotic background radiation of the universe. That is the inescapable, brutal price of thermodynamic reality, but the fundamental quantum essence of your awareness, the pure, irreducible information that allows you to experience existence at all, is utterly indestructible. It is a permanent structural fixture in the geometry of space and time. It is the exact foundational material that will dictate the shape and the physics of the next cosmic cycle. Do not fear the breakdown of the biological machine. Death is not a dark, empty room waiting for you at the end of a hallway. It is the aggressive, explosive expansion of your fundamental quantum structure into the infinite network of reality. You do not die in the way the textbooks claim. You simply stop being a singular, isolated note, and you finally become the entire symphony. Forget the comfortable lies. You are an eternal mathematical pattern written into the fabric of the cosmos. Now, act like it. Now that we've completed this uncompromising journey through quantum consciousness, how do you plan to visually edit and pace this avalanche of logic for your audience?